You are listening to the Heartland Author Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, I had the opportunity to interview J. Edwards Holt. J. Edwards is the author of the Seven Branches of Rhigorrim series, which contains multiple novels, a short story collection, a children's book, a comic book, and a coloring and activity book. J. Edwards is also an ordained minister and a mental health advocate. I'm here with J. Edwards Holt, who is the author of the Seven Branches of Rhigorrim series. Did I pronounce the name of that series correctly?
You did.
J. Edwards, welcome to the Heartland Author Podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Absolutely. As you said, I'm J. Edwards Holt. I'm an author of fantasy fiction. Most of what I write is in the young adult category. However, I also have a couple of books for children as well as a teen comic. Aside from writing fantasy, I also delve into the religious genre, and I write regularly for a health and wellness magazine.
Your series, The Seven Branches of Rhigorrim, contains multiple novels, a short story collection, a children's book, a comic book, and a coloring and activity book. Without spoiling too much of the books in the Seven Branches of Rhigorrim series, what is the series and each book in it about?
All right. The Seven Branches of Rhigorrim itself is basically, it's the name of the universe that I made up, and all the books are set in the Seven Branches of Rhigorrim. There are several books that are connected like a series, but there are also books that are more like standalone books that are connected simply by being in the universe, which are I'm working on some right now that are standalone stories as well. But as far as the series goes, there's a couple of different series. There's the Little Men, Big Treasures trilogy and the Barren World trilogy. Now, these 6 books are actually a series. Each of the Little Men, Big Treasures books can be read as standalones, but they work better if you read them in order. And then the Barren World trilogy, you don't have to read Little Men, Big Treasures to understand it, but it's going to make it mean a whole lot more if you do. So the Little Men, Big Treasures trilogy and the Barren World trilogy could be considered a 6-part series. However, there are some books like the Storyteller's Diary that functions as a standalone book of short stories, but it's also connected, if you get the references. And then, of course, there's The Queen's Colors, which is a standalone story, just connected by being set in the same universe.
How much world building did you do for the Seven Branches of Rhigorrim series?
I've done a lot so far, and I feel like I've still got a long ways to go. Pretty much every day I'm working on expanding the universe and coming up with new stories and ideas and ways to build the world.
Have you written any works outside of the Seven Branches of Rhigorrim series? I think you talked about this a little bit in your intro. And if so, can you tell our listeners a little bit about them without spoiling too much of them?
The books outside of that universe are just a couple of non-fiction religious anthologies that I was a part of.
Okay. What were those called? And I understand those were books that had a lot of different authors as part of a collaborative project.
That's correct. Yes, it's called the Call to Intercede series. I was involved as a co-author of volumes 4 through 7. If I understand correctly, the series is still ongoing, but my part was in 4 through 7. I had the pleasure of getting to know a lot of those other authors and being the co-author with the lead author, and I did a lot of editing in those books. And of course, I added my own input as well. And overall, it's a series I'm proud of, in addition to the Seven Branches stuff.
Now, are the books in the Seven Branches of Rhigorrim series, are those self-published, traditionally published, published by a hybrid press, or did you use a mix of publishing types for the series?
They're actually all self-published. As of right now, everything I've done is self-published. Um, I'd love to work with either a hybrid or a traditional publisher in the future at some point, but until that happens, I'm just doing self-publishing.
You're an ordained minister, and how did you become one?
Let's see. I first got my ordination back in 2014. Um, as far as that goes, I'm not a pastor or anything like that, but I am ordained as a minister. I can perform marriages and things like that. But I grew up and very active in church, and we had several programs that myself and some others participated in and graduated from, and things like that just helped to qualify us for ordainment.
If you have a typical writing routine, I apologize for bouncing back and forth between different types of questions. What is that like?
The writing routine?
Yeah, if you have one.
Yeah. It a lot of it involves just, I'll go throughout the day, and a lot of times I come up with story ideas when I'm doing something that's not related to writing, and then I'll think about those ideas. I'll write them down. Usually I type them just into the notes app on my phone, and then once I kind of have something together, I'll start putting it down some more, and eventually once I've got a first draft, I'll usually transfer that to my laptop and start working on to the second draft, and all the way until it becomes a book.
Now, as you're a mental health advocate, what is your best advice to someone who is struggling with mental health problems?
I always tell people what something that I would like to have heard, when I was younger and stuff was, those of you out there struggling with that, you're not alone. There's a lot more people than you think that are going through either the same thing or something similar. And most importantly too, don't be ashamed to to reach out and get help from a professional or something. It's kind of tough when you're dealing with stuff like that, and you may not want to like tell it to all your family and friends and stuff, but at least reach out to somebody that can help, and that will definitely benefit you. And it's always best to get ahead of something before it gets out of hand.
Now, this is a question I didn't have written down, but in regards to the Seven Branches of Rhigorrim series, did you use the same book cover designer for all of those, or did you use like a mix of book cover designers for each of the books?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much a mix of book cover designers. A couple of them I had more of a hand in myself, and then the others I just used some different graphic designers. Yeah, just a handful of different artists and graphic designers.
As you like to watch science fiction superhero movies like my late father did, have any such movies influenced the Seven Branches of Rhigorrim series in any way?
Well, the Lord of the Rings movies inspired me to be a writer. And of course the Narnia movies from back when and everything. And movies like A Wrinkle in Time and any kind of movie dealing with the whole fantasy thing. Just every time I would watch something like that, I'll be like, okay, I've got to come up with something and make my own story in this genre. And so it's several movies. Anytime I see a good movie with a good plot or something, it just inspires me to make something of my own.
Actually, I do have one final question. Now, you're from the Raleigh, North Carolina area, is that correct?
Uh-huh.
What's it like to live in the Research Triangle region of North Carolina?
Well, I live sort of on the outskirts of it, in a smaller town, but I do spend a significant amount of time over there. But I'm not a fan of the traffic. I'm used to the more small town, where you can just get across town quickly. But it's a challenge, getting across town in Raleigh, and it takes a while to get everywhere. There's so much traffic and stuff, and it's pretty crowded. But overall, it's a nice place. I like it.
Yeah, and from what I understand, the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill area doesn't have a ton of public transit to take some of the strain off of the road network.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, Jay Edwards, you were a wonderful guest for the Heartland Author podcast, and I thank you for appearing on here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Jay Edwards was a fantastic guest. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write your imagination. Bye for now. You can learn more about me and my book writing projects at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/authoraac. You can follow me on Facebook at AuthorAAC and on Instagram at AACScribe. Copyright 2023, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.